Hello. We've been married for 30 years. She's a high-powered corporate lawyer in Chicago, and she's been raking in big bonuses for years. Good luck today, she said, flashing me a smile that seemed a little too confident. I noticed it but shrugged it off. I had a lot on my mind and didn't want to overthink things. I reached my job at a local insurance agency. After dropping my stuff off at my desk, I made my way to the restroom to grab some coffee from the break room next door. But as soon as I got to the bathroom, I felt a sharp, stabbing pain. It was like someone had driven a nail into me from the inside. I couldn't hold back and let out a loud groan. My coworker, Paul, who worked in the claims department, was nearby. He heard me and rushed over. "What's wrong, Chris? You all right?" he asked, clearly worried. I glanced down and saw something that made my stomach churn, a greenish discharge. I felt sick to my core. "I don't know, Paul, but it feels like something's seriously wrong," I managed to say. "You need to get to the doctor, man." "I'll cover for you here, just go," Paul said, already grabbing his phone to inform our boss. I didn't waste any time. I left the office and drove straight to the urgent care center downtown. After they ran some tests, the doctor walked in with a concerned look. "Chris," he said, "you've tested positive for gonorrhea." I sat there in shock. "That's impossible. I've only been with Rachel all these years." The doctor handed me a prescription for antibiotics and told me to avoid any sexual activity for a while. But I wasn't even thinking about that. My mind kept circling back to one question: had Rachel been hiding something from me all this time? As I left the clinic, I couldn't stop thinking about what the doctor had told me. Gonorrhea? How? I was loyal to Rachel, always had been. This didn't make any sense. My hands shook as I tried to dial Rachel's number, but I ended up hanging up before it even started ringing. I couldn't call her, not yet. I needed time to process. I sat in my car for a long time, staring out at the city streets. Chicago was buzzing with life, but it felt like I was the only one standing still. I had no idea what to do next. My mind kept racing back to Rachel, trying to piece together any signs I might have missed. Was she cheating? I wanted to believe she wasn't, but the evidence was right there. I decided to go home early. There was no point in going back to the office. I needed to think things through. As I drove, memories of our 30 years together flashed before my eyes: the day we met, our wedding, the birth of our son, Ethan, and all the milestones we had shared. It seemed impossible that she could have betrayed me after all these years. But then again, how else could this have happened? I pulled into the driveway, sat there for a minute, and took a deep breath before heading inside. The house was quiet, just like it always was when Rachel was at work. I wandered around aimlessly, not really sure what I was looking for. Maybe I thought I'd find some clue, something that could explain all of this. I found myself standing in front of her home office door. It was usually closed, but today it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, stepped inside, and started looking around. Everything seemed normal: her papers, her computer, a few files. But then something caught my eye. It was a bank statement from an account I didn't recognize. I picked it up, and my heart sank. It showed several large deposits, money I had no idea existed. What was this? A secret bank account? Why hadn't she told me about it? My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers, each one confirming the same thing: Rachel had been hiding this from me for years. I couldn't sit still. My hands were shaking, and my head was spinning. I kept looking at the papers spread out on the coffee table in front of me, the bank statements. Thousands of dollars in some secret account I had no clue about. I didn't know whether I felt more angry or sick. How could she do this? The sound of Rachel's car pulling up outside snapped me back to reality. She was home. This was it. I stood up, pacing, trying to get my thoughts in order. But my mind was racing. 30 years together, and now this? My stomach churned as I heard the front door open. Rachel walked in, carrying her usual air of calm like nothing was wrong. "Hey, babe," she said, smiling like she always did after work. She didn't have the faintest idea that her whole world was about to collapse. I couldn't do small talk. "We need to talk," I blurted out, my voice shaky. I wasn't prepared, but I couldn't wait any longer. She froze, her smile fading. "What's wrong?" She looked at me like I'd just slapped her. I pointed to the papers on the table. "What's this?" Rachel looked down at the bank statements, and I saw it, the flicker of panic in her eyes. Just for a second, but I caught it. She tried to brush it off, though, like she always does. "Chris, it's not a big deal," she said, her voice way too calm for what this was. "Not a big deal?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Rachel, it's a hidden account with thousands of dollars. How is this not a big deal? How long have you been hiding this from me?" She crossed her arms and sighed like she was annoyed. "I just wanted to have a backup, okay? For emergencies. I didn't think it was something I needed to tell you." "A backup?" I shot back. "For what? What kind of emergency were you planning for? Were you planning to leave me?" She stared at me, her jaw tightening. "No, Chris, I'm not planning to leave you." "Why would you even think that?" "Because you've been lying to me," I yelled, my voice louder than I intended. "You've been lying to me for years. I thought we were in this together, and now I find out you've been stashing away money like you're preparing to run." Rachel didn't flinch. She just stood there, stone-faced. "I'm not leaving you." "Then why hide it?" I was shaking now, my anger boiling over. "If you weren't planning to do something, why hide the damn money?" For the first time, she didn't have an answer. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. And in that silence, I got my answer. She was never going to admit it, but I knew. I knew everything I needed to know. I didn't sleep that night. After Rachel's silence, after that moment where I knew she wouldn't tell me the truth, I couldn't stay in the same room with her. We didn't talk much after our argument. She went upstairs, and I stayed downstairs, staring at the same damn bank statements. I kept going over it in my head, trying to understand why she'd do this. Was it all fake? 30 years of marriage, our life together, it felt like it had all been built on a lie. The more I thought about it, the more everything started to fall apart in my mind. Little things I'd brushed off over the years now seemed like warning signs I missed. Her late work nights, the trips she took that didn't always add up. I trusted her, and now that trust was gone. By the time the sun came up, I knew I had to confront this head-on. No more dancing around it. No more guessing. Rachel came downstairs the next morning like nothing had happened, but I could see it in her eyes, she was avoiding me. She poured herself coffee, her back turned to me, pretending everything was normal. I couldn't take it anymore. "Are we going to talk about this, or are you just going to act like it didn't happen?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. She froze for a second, then turned around slowly, holding her mug. "Chris, I told you, it's just money. Why are you blowing this out of proportion?" I stared at her, not believing she was trying to brush it off again. "Just money? You hid thousands of dollars from me, Rachel. What else are you hiding?" Her face tightened, and she set her mug down, the clink of ceramic on the counter sounding too loud in the tense silence. "I'm not hiding anything," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction she was trying to fake. I wasn't buying it. "Tell me the truth, Rachel. All of it. Why the secret account? What was the plan? Were you going to leave me?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at me, her eyes searching for something, maybe an excuse, maybe a way out. Then, she sighed. I wasn't planning to leave you, but I wasn't sure how things were going to go. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean, you weren't sure? Rachel crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. I wanted to feel safe. In case things between us. I don't know, if they didn't work out. I didn't want to be caught with nothing. So you were preparing to leave, just in case? My voice was cold, and I could feel the distance between us growing wider with every word. She looked away, her gaze falling to the floor. I wasn't planning on it, but, yeah, I guess I was. The room went silent. My heart sank. After all these years, after everything we'd been through, she had been planning an escape route. Not just for a rainy day, but for the possibility of leaving me behind. I didn't know what to say. The woman I thought I knew was a stranger standing in my kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring into nothing while Rachel quietly sipped her coffee, as if this was any other morning. But it wasn't. It was the moment when everything we built over 30 years started to crumble right in front of me. I didn't even know what to say anymore. What was left to say? Chris, she finally said, breaking the silence. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get like this. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I looked at her, feeling that familiar wave of anger mixed with something else, sadness, betrayal, and exhaustion. So, you were just going to keep this hidden? For how long? Until you actually left? She shook her head quickly, her face desperate. No. I wasn't planning to leave you. I swear I wasn't. I felt like I needed to protect myself, just in case. In case what, Rachel? I asked, my voice tight. In case our marriage fell apart? In case I didn't make enough money? In case you just got tired of me? She winced at that last part, but it was out there now, hanging in the air between us. It wasn't like that, she whispered. Things haven't been the same for a long time, Chris. You know that. The weight of her words hit me. I did know that. Somewhere deep down, I knew things between us had changed over the years. The passion we once had was gone, replaced by routine and comfort. We weren't the same couple we were when we got married. But that didn't mean I was planning an escape route. And I sure as hell didn't expect her to. What did you think would happen, Rachel? I asked, my voice softer now, though the pain was still sharp. Were you waiting for me to figure it out? Or were you hoping I wouldn't? She didn't answer right away. She just looked down, her eyes filling with something I hadn't seen in her for a long time, regret. I didn't know what I was doing, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I thought I was protecting myself. But maybe I was just scared. Scared of what? I asked, leaning forward, trying to catch her eyes. Scared of what would happen if we couldn't make it work anymore, she finally said, looking up at me, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't want to end up with nothing. I didn't want to be stuck. But I wasn't going to leave you. I swear, Chris, I wasn't. The room was filled with silence again, but this time it felt different, heavier, like we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't pull back from. I sighed and rubbed my hands over my face. I don't know what to do with this, I said, more to myself than to her. How do I move on from this, Rachel? How do we even begin to fix this? I don't know, she whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. But I don't want to lose you. I really don't. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this wasn't the end of us. But the trust? The foundation we built our lives on? It felt shattered. And I didn't know if we could ever get that back. The next few days felt like living in a fog. We went through the motions. Rachel went to work. I tried to keep myself busy around the house, but nothing was the same. It was as if we were strangers living under the same roof. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was short, almost robotic. Neither of us knew how to fix what had been broken. At night, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every moment that led us here. I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't know the woman lying next to me anymore. She was right there, but she felt a million miles away. I tried to focus on the practical things, the bills, the house, anything to keep my mind off the gnawing emptiness inside. But no matter what I did, the thought kept creeping in, was this the end? Were we just dragging out something that was already over? Rachel acted like nothing was wrong most of the time. She went about her day, ticking off her to-do list like always, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew we were drifting apart, too. There were moments, when she thought I wasn't looking, where I caught her staring off into space, a look of regret or guilt in her eyes. It was like she knew she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but neither of us had the courage to face it head-on. One evening, about a week after everything had come to light, I decided I couldn't keep living in this limbo anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know if there was anything left between us worth saving. Rachel was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine like everything was fine. I sat down across from her, the tension in the air so thick it was hard to breathe. "We can't keep doing this," I said, breaking the silence. She looked up at me, her eyes tired. "Doing what?" "This," I said, motioning between us. "Living like nothing's happened. We both know things aren't the same, Rachel. You've barely talked to me since everything came out, and I feel like I'm losing you, like I already have." She set the magazine aside, letting out a long sigh. "I don't know what to say, Chris. I don't know how to fix this." "I don't either," I admitted. "But we have to start somewhere. We can't just pretend everything's okay when it's not." Her face softened a little, and she leaned back, crossing her arms like she was trying to protect herself from what was coming next. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to handle what I was feeling." "What were you feeling?" I asked, my voice quieter now, genuinely wanting to understand. She paused for a moment, staring at the floor. "I felt like I was losing myself," she said finally. "I felt trapped. We've been together for so long, and it was like I was just fading into the background. I didn't know who I was anymore." Her words stung, but I listened. I could hear the truth in them. Somewhere along the way, we had lost ourselves, lost each other, and neither of us knew how to get back to who we once were. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where do we go from here?" Rachel shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know," she said. "But I don't want it to end like this." Neither did I. But I wasn't sure if wanting to save us was enough. The days that followed our conversation felt like walking a tightrope. We were careful around each other, neither of us wanting to say the wrong thing or push the other too far. But the unspoken tension was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I wanted things to go back to how they were, or at least to some version of that, but part of me wasn't sure if that was even possible anymore. Every time I looked at Rachel, I saw a different woman. She wasn't the wife I thought I knew. And maybe I wasn't the same man either. Trust had been the foundation of everything, and now that it was cracked, I didn't know how to rebuild it. But I knew one thing: I couldn't live in this limbo much longer. The silence, the distance, it was unbearable. One night, after another meal eaten mostly in silence, I decided to speak up again. The kitchen was dimly lit, and Rachel was quietly doing the dishes. I stood there for a minute, watching her, trying to find the right words. "This isn't working, is it?" I said softly, breaking the silence. She stopped washing the plate in her hands and stared at it for a long moment before turning to face me. What do you mean? I mean, this, I said, gesturing to the space between us, the invisible wall that had grown since everything had come out. We can't keep pretending like we're fine, because we're not. Rachel sighed, setting the plate down and wiping her hands on a towel. I know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know what to do anymore, Chris. I don't know how to fix this. I stepped closer, leaning against the counter. Do you even want to? The question hung heavy in the air. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer, but I needed to know. Rachel's eyes filled with tears again, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she nodded. I do. I don't want to lose us. Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Not entirely. I could see that she was telling the truth, but something still felt off. Maybe it was the weight of everything that had already happened, the lies, the distance that had grown between us. Or maybe it was the realization that wanting to fix something didn't mean it was possible. I don't either, I said, running a hand through my hair. But how do we come back from this? How do I trust you again after everything? Rachel wiped her eyes, looking down at the floor. I don't know, she whispered. But I'm willing to try, if you are. I wanted to say yes, to just agree and dive headfirst into fixing everything. But something held me back. The pain, the betrayal, it wasn't something I could just forget. It wasn't something I could fix overnight. And I wasn't sure if it ever could be fixed. I need time, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time to figure out if we can even do this. Rachel looked up at me, her face pale. I understand, she said softly, her voice trembling. I'll give you as much time as you need. The silence that followed felt different this time, heavier, more final. I didn't know where we'd go from here. I didn't know if we'd ever get back to the way things were. But for now, we were both standing at the edge, unsure of what would come next. The days had blurred into weeks, and the silence between Rachel and me had grown thick, like a wall neither of us could break through. We weren't yelling or fighting, there wasn't even enough energy left for that. But the worst part? We weren't talking either. It was like we'd run out of things to say, and that terrified me more than anything. One Friday night, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a half-empty cup of coffee. The house was too quiet. Rachel had been out again. I knew it wasn't an affair or anything like that, it wasn't about another person. It was just us. Or the lack of us, lately. I heard the front door open, and there she was, coming in quietly like she didn't want to wake anyone up, even though it was just me. We didn't even do the small talk thing anymore, the whole "how was your day" routine. It felt pointless when we both knew we were miles apart. Hey, I said, my voice sounding a little rough from the quiet. Hey, she replied softly, looking at me for a moment, then quickly glancing away. It was awkward, like we were strangers. I watched her walk into the kitchen and stand near the counter. For a minute, neither of us said anything. But I couldn't do this anymore, the waiting, the pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Rachel, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She paused, then nodded slowly. She came over to the table and sat down across from me. I could see it in her eyes, she knew this was coming. Hell, we'd both known for a while. We can't keep going like this, I said. It feels like we're just here. Like we're just waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever does. Rachel let out a breath and leaned back in her chair. I know. I've been feeling it too, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. It's like... I don't know. Like we're living separate lives under the same roof. I nodded. That's exactly what it felt like. We'd become two people coexisting, but the connection we used to have, the one that felt effortless, was gone. And I didn't know how to get it back. "I don't want to lose you," I said, the words coming out raw. "But I don't know if we can fix this." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't try to stop them. "I don't know either," she said, her voice cracking. "And maybe we can't go back to what we had." Hearing her say it, what I had been thinking but was too afraid to admit, made my chest tighten. I wanted to argue, to say we could figure it out, that there was still hope. But I couldn't lie to her, not when I didn't even believe it myself. "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at the table, tracing the edge of her coffee mug with her finger. "Maybe we need some time apart. Space to figure out what we really want. Maybe then we'll know if there's anything left to save." Her words stung, but they also made sense. We had been stuck in this cycle for so long, pretending things would get better if we just waited long enough. But nothing was changing. Maybe space was the only thing that could help us see clearly. "Yeah," I said, nodding slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we need that time to figure out what's next." Rachel wiped her eyes, but more tears followed. "I'll stay with my sister for a while," she said, her voice trembling. "Just until we figure things out." I didn't want her to leave. The idea of coming home to an empty house, of her not being there, hit me harder than I expected. But at the same time, I knew we couldn't keep living like this. The distance between us had already gotten too wide. "Okay," I said quietly. "Take as much time as you need." We sat there for a few more minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Neither of us had the energy to say much more. The decision had been made, and now we just had to live with it. Later that night, I watched as Rachel packed a small bag. She didn't take much, just enough for a few nights. As I stood by the door, watching her zip up her suitcase, it felt surreal. I never thought it would come to this, but here we were. When she was ready, she stopped at the front door and turned to look at me. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said softly, her voice shaky. "But I hope we can figure it out." "I hope so too," I replied, my throat tight. Rachel nodded and gave me a small, sad smile before she stepped out the door. The sound of the door closing behind her was quiet, but it felt so final. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there in the hallway for a long time, listening to the silence. The house felt emptier than it ever had before, and I wasn't sure what to do with that. The quiet wasn't as heavy as it had been in the past few weeks, but it wasn't exactly peaceful either. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending that everything would magically get better. I wasn't waiting for some sudden change. I was just here, alone, wondering what would happen next. The morning after Rachel left, I woke up and immediately knew something was different. Her side of the bed was cold, untouched. I guess I expected it to feel emptier, but the emptiness was more inside me than anywhere else. I got up and went downstairs, trying to stick to my usual routine. Coffee, toast, the morning news, but none of it felt right. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept glancing toward the front door, half expecting her to walk back in, like it had all been some kind of bad dream. But she didn't, and I was alone in the quiet house. The first few days were tough. I tried to fill my time, cleaning up around the house, running errands I'd been putting off, anything to avoid sitting still. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop thinking about her. About us. About what the hell went wrong. Rachel and I hadn't talked since that night. We agreed to give each other space, but I didn't realize how hard that would be. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would jump, hoping it was her, but it never was. Friends would text, asking how I was holding up, but what was I supposed to say? That I was fine? I wasn't. Most nights, I'd find myself sitting on the couch, staring at the TV but not really watching. my mind kept wandering back to her. What was she doing? Was she thinking about me? Or was she relieved to finally have some distance between us? One night, about a week after she left, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were, smiling and happy, on vacation a few years back. I couldn't believe how easy everything had been back then. It felt like a lifetime ago. Looking at those pictures, it felt like we were different people. I couldn't figure out when things had changed so much. That's when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look, convinced it was another meaningless message from a friend, but when I checked, my heart skipped a beat. It was Rachel. "How are you?" she texted. Just two simple words, but they hit me hard. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, not sure how to answer. Should I be honest? Should I tell her how lost I felt, how empty the house was without her? Or should I play it cool, act like I was handling things? After a long pause, I typed back, "I'm okay. You?" Not exactly the truth, but not a lie either. She responded almost immediately. "I'm getting by. It's been weird." I read those words over and over again. Weird. That's how she described it. I wondered if weird meant she was struggling like I was, or if she was already starting to feel better without me around. I thought about calling her, about trying to really talk. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Fear that if we started talking again, I'd hear something I wasn't ready to hear. Or maybe it was just that I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. All I knew was that I missed her. I missed her more than I could admit, even to myself. So, instead of calling, I texted back, "I miss you." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd said too much. But then her reply came through. "I miss you too." That was it. 4 words. But it was enough. It wasn't a fix, and it didn't solve anything, but for the first time since she left, I felt like maybe we weren't as far apart as I thought. Maybe there was still something there. I sat back on the couch, my phone in my hand, staring at those words on the screen. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a promise. But it was a start. And for the first time in days, I felt like we might still have a chance. Maybe. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. It felt like the longer we avoided talking, the further apart we drifted. So one night, I finally texted Rachel. "Can we talk? I feel like we need to figure out what's going on." I stared at my phone for a while, heart pounding, until her reply came in. "Yeah, let's talk. How about tomorrow?" The next day, we met at a small coffee shop, the same one we used to go to when things were easier between us. I got there early, nerves eating away at me. When Rachel walked in, she looked the same, but different. It wasn't just the time apart, it was the weight of everything unsaid. "Hey," she said, sitting down. "Hey," I replied, feeling awkward but relieved we were finally here. There was a brief silence before I spoke up. "I've been thinking a lot about us." Rachel nodded, her eyes downcast. "Me too. I thought time apart would make things clearer, but it's just made me realize how far we've drifted." Her words hit hard because they were exactly what I'd been feeling. I didn't even know when we had stopped talking or when we'd lost each other. "I miss us," she said, wiping at a tear. "But I'm scared we won't get back to that." "I'm scared too," I admitted. "But I want to try. I don't want to give up on us." She looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw hope in her eyes. "I want to try too." We sat there for a while, talking through everything we hadn't said. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. By the time we left, nothing was fixed, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a real shot. After that talk at the coffee shop, things didn't magically fix themselves. We didn't suddenly snap back to the couple we used to be. But something had shifted. There was a little less tension, a little more willingness to actually try again. Rachel stayed at her sister's place for a few more days, and during that time, we texted more often. It wasn't deep conversations, but it was something. Just small messages here and there to check in. And for the first time in a while, it felt like we were both putting in the effort. One evening, she texted me out of the blue. "Want to grab dinner this weekend? Just us." It wasn't much, but it was enough to make my heart beat a little faster. This was her reaching out, trying to reconnect. I typed back quickly. "Yeah, let's do it." That weekend, we met at a quiet restaurant in town. It was the first time in a long time that we were sitting across from each other with no distractions, just us, trying to figure things out. There were moments of awkwardness, but also moments where it felt like we were rediscovering each other. We laughed at a joke one of us made about how awkward this first date felt after all these years together. But under the surface, I could tell we were both testing the waters, trying to see if this could actually work. It wasn't a dramatic, tear-filled conversation like before. It was quieter, more subtle. And honestly, that felt better. Like we were just two people who'd been through a lot, but who still had something worth saving. As the night went on, I realized we were taking the first real steps toward finding each other again. We weren't rushing into anything, but we were trying. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like we were pretending. When we walked out of the restaurant, the air was cool, and we stood outside for a moment, neither of us wanting to say goodbye too quickly. Rachel looked up at me and smiled, a real smile this time, not the forced one I'd gotten used to over the past few months. "Thanks for tonight," she said softly. "Yeah," I replied. "It was good. It felt good." She nodded, and for a second, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Not perfect, but okay. And that was more than enough for now. After that dinner, we didn't rush things. Rachel stayed at her sister's for a few more days, but we kept talking, small steps. Texting, meeting for coffee, just little moments where it felt like we were starting to find each other again. One evening, she came over, and we both knew we had to talk about the next step. "I don't want to go back to how things were," Rachel said, sitting on the couch. "But I don't want to lose this, either. What we've started to rebuild." I nodded. "I don't want to go back either. But maybe we can move forward, better this time." There was a pause, then she smiled softly. "I think I'm ready to come home." Hearing those words made everything feel lighter. "I think it's time," I agreed. That night, she moved back in. It wasn't dramatic or emotional, just quiet, simple, like we were starting fresh. Over the next few months, we focused on the little things. Talking more, listening better, making time for each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like we had a real shot at making this work. A few weeks after Rachel moved back in, we were still adjusting. Things weren't perfect, but they weren't as tense as they used to be. We were both trying, and that felt like a big step. But rebuilding takes time, and I think we were both realizing it wasn't going to be a quick fix. There were moments when it felt awkward, like we didn't know how to be around each other anymore. It wasn't like before, when we'd just fall into familiar routines. Now, everything felt a little forced, like we were relearning how to be together. But we were making an effort to talk, really talk, not just about the day-to-day stuff but about how we felt. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was necessary. One night, after dinner, we were sitting on the couch, just watching TV, when Rachel muted the show and turned to me. "Do you think this is going to work?" she asked, catching me a little off guard. I paused, not wanting to give her some rehearsed or overly optimistic answer. "I don't know if we'll ever be exactly like we were," I said. "But maybe that's not what we need." Maybe we can figure out something new. She looked at me for a moment, like she was considering that. Then she nodded, letting out a small sigh. I don't want to go back to how it was. That's what got us here in the first place. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. It was one of those rare moments when you just know the other person gets it. We both knew this wasn't about going back to the past. It was about figuring out how to move forward. In the weeks that followed, things got a little easier. We still had our disagreements, old frustrations would bubble up, but this time, we were talking about them instead of letting them simmer. We didn't shut down like we used to. And that felt different, like progress. One night, while we were getting ready for bed, Rachel turned to me out of nowhere and said, "I'm glad we didn't just give up, you know. Even when it felt like maybe we should have." I thought about that for a second and then nodded. Yeah. Me too. It wasn't some big, dramatic declaration. It wasn't like everything was magically fixed. But in that moment, it felt like we were really in this together again, both of us willing to put in the effort. And that was enough, for now, at least. Bye.